I wanted to make a zero clearance insert for my table saw, the DeWalt DW745. If you're watching this video, then you probably already know the many reasons why these are beneficial over the standard factory inserts. They do a lot to limit the amount of tear out you get from table saw cuts, and they also provide more support when making cuts to smaller pieces. Before starting, I wanted to work out how thick the insert would need to be, so I adjusted the bolts on the factory insert that came with the table saw to get it to be as flush with the table as possible, and then measured the distance between the top surface of the insert and the bottom of the height adjustment bolts using my calipers. I took a reading from each of the 4 height adjustment bolts, and I was getting readings ranging from 12.09mm to 12.43mm. This meant that I would need to make the new insert just over 12mm in thickness for it to be flush with the table. I then started looking through my piles of scrap wood to find something that was thicker than 12mm and wide enough to make the insert. I ended up choosing a piece of pallet wood that I think may be Poplar. This has been in my workshop for over 6 months now, so I knew that the wood would be nice and dry and should be stable by now, so I could be fairly confident that it wouldn't shrink, twist, warp or crack over time. I used the insert that came with the table saw as a template and marked out the shape on the wood. Then I chopped off the excess on the miter saw and carved out the shape on the bandsaw, making sure to stay as close to the outside of the lines that I'd drawn as I could, as I wanted it to be as snug a fit as possible, and I could always sand it down to the right size later. Then I set up my jointer and made a few passes on one side to get it perfectly flat. Once it was flat, I measured it with the calipers in various places and it was averaging at about 17.5mm thick. So then I knew I needed to take 5mm off the thickness of the piece. So I set up the thicknesser to 15mm at first, and placed the insert with the new flat jointed side face down and made a pass. Then I set it to below 13mm and made a second pass. I then took some more readings on the calipers and it was averaging around 12.3mm thick, which was good enough for me. I then rounded over the edges of the insert on the disc sander and cleaned up the shape, and then used the orbital sander to clean it up a bit more. Next, I wanted to create a finger hole so that I could remove the insert from the table saw. I drilled a small pilot hole and then came back with a 1-inch spade bit. I drilled through with this from both sides to avoid tear out and then cleaned it up with a round file. Now it was time to cut the slot in the insert, and the conventional and safest way to do this would have been to fit a small blade on the saw and raise the blade through the new insert while holding it down with some push sticks. But I didn't have a small blade, so what I did was to set up my fence so it was overhanging the side of the opening by a tiny fraction, and then I could just slowly and carefully push the insert through the blade against the fence, guiding it into the slot with my push sticks. This is not the ideal way to do it, but it worked well enough for me. And it was a pretty good fit. I did a bit more filing to clean up the finger hole and then applied some boiled linseed oil. Finally, I could refit the insert and fully raise the blade while holding the insert down with the push stick. And that was the table insert finished.